Back in the spring of 2022, I booked myself a little trip through an Airbnb rental. It was nothing fancy, just a cabin tucked away in the woods. The cabin was small, cozy, and simple, but it sat on a piece of property where the owner had built several more cabins, all looking almost identical. They were spread out far enough that you could not really see one from the other, and the only way to move between them were faint paths in the trees. These paths did not look official at all, more like trails the owner made when hauling materials around while building the cabins. No signs, no markings, nothing to make a visitor feel like they actually led somewhere. I had not gone on the trip with any special plans. The cabin was only about 3 hours from my home, and I just figured it would be nice to unplug for a couple of days and spend some time in the quiet of the woods. On my second day, I let myself sleep in way too late, waking up around noon. I brewed myself some coffee, sat by the fireplace, and just took it easy for most of the afternoon. It was peaceful, almost boring, but in a good way. Not long before sunset, I decided I should stretch my legs and get some fresh air. I tossed on a hoodie and stepped outside, not even sure where I planned to go. The forest looked calm, the kind of calm that almost makes you forget there could be anything bad out there. Behind the cabin, I saw one of those faint little trails and figured I would follow it for a bit. Maybe it would lead to one of the other cabins. Maybe it would loop me back around. Who knew? The trail took me deeper into the woods, and after a few minutes, something caught my eye. Out there, maybe 200 or 300 yards away, were two men. They were not walking or talking or doing anything normal. They were just standing completely still, both of them staring down at something on the forest floor. From the distance I was at, it was hard to tell exactly what they were looking at, but what bothered me was how motionless they were. They did not glance around. They did not shift their weight. They just stood frozen like statues. I kept walking along my path, pretending not to care, but my eyes kept flicking back in their direction until the trees finally blocked my view. I told myself they were probably just guests from one of the other cabins, maybe hunters, maybe hikers, and that it probably only looked strange from where I was standing. At least that is what I was hoping. A few more minutes down the path, I realized the trail was not curving back or forming a loop like I thought it might. It just kept cutting straight into the forest, further and further away from the cabins. With the image of those two men still fresh in my mind, I started to feel uneasy. I told myself it was probably a good idea to turn back. Just as I had that thought, a noise ripped through the trees and stopped me dead in my tracks. It was loud, deep, and strange, almost like the scream of an animal. At first, I thought maybe it was an elk bellowing, but something about it sounded unnatural, like it did not belong in the forest. The sound echoed all around me. I spun around, and my heart nearly dropped. Standing there on the trail, maybe 150 yards behind me, were the same two men. Only now they were facing directly toward me. They were not moving, not walking, just staring my way. I froze. I could not tell if they were really looking at me or just facing my direction, but either way, it made my stomach twist. The noise I had just heard felt too powerful and too unnatural to have come from them, even if they had been trying to imitate some kind of animal. That sound shook the entire forest, and it definitely did not seem human. I stared at them for maybe 10 or 15 seconds, not sure what to do. Then, slowly, I started to back up a few steps. The second I moved, the two men stepped off the trail and disappeared into the trees. I stood there another few minutes, trying to listen, trying to see if they were still nearby. The problem was, in order to get back to my cabin, I had to walk the same path I had just come down. That meant walking right past the spot where they had been standing. Finally, after waiting long enough that the silence felt worse than moving, I forced myself to head back. I kept my pace quick, my eyes darting to the tree line, but I never saw them again. By the time I reached my cabin, my nerves were shot. I thought about messaging the Airbnb host to ask about the strange trails and whether he knew who those men could have been, but the whole thing felt ridiculous to even type out. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I saw two men standing in the woods like scarecrows. Do you know them? I let it go and kept it to myself. That night, I tried to settle back in, throwing more wood into the fireplace and making a cup of tea. I told myself I was safe inside and that nothing was going to happen. For a short while, it worked. After maybe half an hour, I felt relaxed enough to enjoy the evening again. But then, out of nowhere, I heard it. That same awful sound from earlier. It came again, distant but loud enough to cut through the crackle of the fire. My stomach sank. The walls of the cabin were not thick, so I could not be sure how close the sound really was. I walked to the back window and peered outside, but all I could see were dark tree shapes swaying in the night. The forest was black, the kind of black where your eyes cannot adjust no matter how long you look. Standing there gave me such a chill that I yanked the curtains shut. I pulled out my phone and tried to look up animal sounds from the area, hoping to match what I had heard. I scrolled through recordings of elk, coyotes, even mountain lions, but nothing sounded right. The longer I searched, the more unsettled I became, until I finally put the phone down and told myself to forget it. Not long after, maybe 30 minutes, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps on the wooden steps of the front porch. They stopped right outside the door. My heart pounded so hard I thought the men outside might be able to hear it. After about 20 seconds, there came a slow, deliberate knock. I crept up to the peephole, praying it was just my imagination, but no, it was them. The same two men I had seen in the woods. Only now they wore masks. Cheap plastic animal masks, the kind you might buy at a discount store around Halloween. Each of them had their hood up, and they looked almost identical. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and started dialing 911. I tried to talk quietly, telling the dispatcher what was happening, but I was certain the men could hear me. While I was on the call, a sudden, violent thud slammed against the door. For a second, I thought they were going to break it down. The fear that washed over me was like nothing I had ever felt in my life. And then, just like that, it stopped. Their footsteps moved off the porch, and through the peephole, I saw them walking back into the woods. When the police officer finally arrived, about 30 minutes later, he found a long mark in the wood of the door. It looked like they had stabbed a knife into it before leaving. The officer wrote everything down, but did not seem fully convinced. I understood why. It sounded insane. Two men in animal masks standing silently in the woods, screaming like some unnatural beast, then showing up at my cabin door? If I had not lived through it, I would not have believed it either. I left the cabin the very next morning and never went back. Even now, every once in a while, I check the news in that area, half expecting to read about someone going missing in those woods. But so far, nothing has come up. I still do not know what those men wanted, or what would have happened if they had decided to push through that door. All I know is that night, something was out there in the forest with me, and I was lucky to walk away. When I got promoted at work last year, part of the deal was that I would start traveling more. It was not like I was making a ton of extra money, but I had always been single and did not have much holding me down at home, so the idea of flying around and staying in different towns actually sounded kind of exciting. The company would put me up in whatever lodging was available, sometimes hotels, sometimes resorts, and every now and then, they booked me an Airbnb rental. I never really knew where I would be staying until the trip was already lined up. At first that kept things interesting, but after about 8 months of it, the thrill had worn off. On one particular trip, I was flying into a smaller city where I had to visit one of the company's local branches. The plane landed late. I picked up my rental car, and I plugged the Airbnb address into the GPS. Right away, I noticed it was farther than usual from the office, about a 40-minute drive, when normally they kept me much closer. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it was close to 1 in the morning, and I honestly thought I had made a wrong turn. The place was huge. I am talking 4,000 or 5,000 square feet, maybe more, with a sprawling yard and tall trees on every side. From the outside, it looked more like a mansion than a rental house. I had to check the address 3 times to convince myself I was in the right place. Dragging my luggage inside, I saw that the interior, while still nice, felt a little dated. Not dirty, not run down, just decorated in a style that did not match the outside. Big chandeliers, old wooden furniture, faded carpets. Stuff you would expect to see in your grandparents' house, not in a modern rental listing. Still, there was no denying how much space I had. It was far more than one person would ever need, and it almost felt awkward, like being a guest in somebody's home instead of just staying in a rental. By then, I was exhausted. I carried my bags upstairs to the bedroom, set them down, and turned off the lights. The second I laid down, though, I noticed the noises. The house creaked constantly. Every few seconds it sounded like a board shifting or a faint thump inside the walls. Nothing that screamed danger, just enough to remind me I was alone in a giant, unfamiliar place. I tried to ignore it, but I am a light sleeper, and the noises made me restless. After nearly an hour of tossing around, I realized my throat was dry. I had not eaten or had anything to drink since the flight, so I reluctantly got up and started down the long hallway toward the kitchen. What struck me as odd was that the very moment I left the bedroom, the sound stopped. Dead silent. I walked down the stairs slowly, listening as hard as I could, but not a single creak or thump came from anywhere in the house. It was the kind of silence that presses on your ears. I shook my head, filled a glass of water in the kitchen without turning on any lights, and went back upstairs. Somehow, that small drink was enough to calm me down, and I finally managed to drift off. The next day at the office was long and draining. Afterward, a couple of the guys I was meeting with invited me out for drinks, and by the time I got back to the Airbnb, it was already past 11 at night. I set my keys on the counter, dropped onto the living room sofa, and just sat there for a minute trying to relax. Then I remembered that I still had not seen the entire house. Curiosity got the better of me, so I stood up and started wandering. Room after room, hallway after hallway, it just felt excessive. It was too much space for anyone traveling alone. I pulled out my phone, looked up the listing again, and saw that the price was the same as other much smaller rentals in the area. That did not make sense to me. Why was such a massive property going for the same cost as a tiny studio apartment down the street? As I explored, I started noticing little things that felt off. The house was clean, but not reset the way most rentals are. A pillow was lying crooked on one of the couches. A chair was angled in a way that made me think someone had been sitting there recently. The weirdest part was the kitchen. One of the dining chairs was pulled out from the table, like somebody had just gotten up. I had been in there that morning, and I was almost certain all the chairs were pushed in. Maybe I just missed it, but something about it bothered me enough that I slid the chair back into place before heading upstairs. I took a quick shower, turned out all the lights, and climbed into bed. Just as my body was finally giving in to sleep, the sound started again. At first it was the same creaking and faint thumping, but this time it seemed more deliberate, like footsteps. I sat up in bed, straining my ears. The longer I listened, the more convinced I became that someone was walking around downstairs. I even thought I heard the soft slam of a cabinet door. My heart started beating harder. Maybe it was my imagination, maybe it was just the house settling, but I could not shake the feeling that someone else was moving around in that house. I eased my bedroom door open. This time, the noises did not stop. I could clearly hear them echoing up through the floorboards. I tiptoed down the hallway and onto the staircase, which groaned under my weight. And then, everything went quiet. Dead quiet. My pulse was racing as I reached the bottom of the steps. From there, I could see a faint glow spilling from the kitchen. I was positive I had turned off every light in the house before bed, but now one was on. I walked slowly down the hall, trying to convince myself I had just forgotten. When I reached the kitchen doorway, my stomach dropped. The same dining chair was pulled out again. And then I saw it. In the far back of the room, past the kitchen in an unlit corner, a figure was standing half hidden behind the wall. I could barely make out the shape of a head peeking around the corner, just watching me. I froze solid. My eyes locked with theirs, though I could not see their face clearly in the shadows. We stayed like that for what felt like a lifetime, and then suddenly the figure snapped back behind the wall. A second later, a door slammed somewhere in the darkness. I do not know what came over me, but I ran forward, flicked the lights on, and tried to see where they had gone. The problem was, there was no door in that spot. The sound I had heard had no explanation. At that point, panic took over. I bolted upstairs, grabbed my phone, and ran outside into the night air. From the safety of my car, I called the police. When the officer arrived, I explained everything, but it was clear he did not fully buy it. He searched the house, found nothing, and left me with little more than a shrug. The host arrived later, and I tried to explain it all to him too. His reaction was even stranger. He acted like I was making it up, like he did not want to be bothered. He even told me that what I described was impossible because there were no doors where I swore I had heard one slam. I could not spend another night there. My company set me up in a hotel for the rest of the week, and while I was grateful, the truth is I never really shook the fear. Lying in bed at that hotel, I kept thinking about that figure, standing perfectly still in the shadows, just watching me. And the chair, how it kept moving. I do not know who was in that house with me, or how they got in, but I do know one thing. If I had stayed, if I had gone back to bed and ignored those noises, there is a good chance I would not be here to tell this story. I booked this small rental through Airbnb when I was traveling alone for work. On the app, the place looked simple, nothing special, but clean and affordable. The host, a man named Jay, was quick to respond to every message, almost too quick. He said he would meet me in person and give me the keys. I did not think much of it at the time. When I arrived, Jay greeted me outside the house. He was a tall, thin man, maybe in his late 40s, with messy dark hair and a smile that did not feel right. It was the kind of smile where the lips curl up, but the eyes stay cold and empty. The house itself looked much older than in the pictures. The wooden steps creaked as we walked up to the porch, and the inside smelled damp, like mold and dust had been trapped there for years. Jay kept talking as he showed me around, but his words felt rehearsed, like he had said them 100 times before. He told me the kitchen was mine to use, the living room had a television, and the bedroom upstairs had fresh sheets. He was polite, but the way he hovered made me uneasy. At one point, I asked him if he rented out the entire house often. He paused for just a moment before answering. Only to the right kind of people. Then he gave me that smile again. That first night, I lay awake in the small upstairs bedroom. Every sound in the house made me tense. The floorboards groaned, the pipes rattled, and I could swear I heard soft footsteps on the stairs. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking it. But sometime around 2 in the morning, I heard the sound of a door slowly opening. It came from the hallway, right outside my room. I froze in bed, holding my breath. The door stayed open for a long time before finally closing with a quiet click. I never heard anyone leave. The next day, I explored the house a little more. In the hallway near the kitchen, I noticed a locked door I had not seen the night before. The lock was old, scratched around the edges, like someone had tried to open it many times. I asked Jay about it casually, but his expression changed instantly. His smile vanished. He said, "That part of the house is off limits. It is just storage. Nothing for you to worry about." The way he said it only made me more suspicious. That evening, Jay insisted on cooking dinner for me. I tried to say no, but he insisted, saying, "You are my guest. It would be rude if I did not." He made pasta, and as we sat at the small wooden table, I noticed how intently he watched me eat, like he was studying me. The silence stretched on, and every bite felt heavier. Later that night, I could not sleep again. The house was too quiet, too heavy. Around midnight, I heard it, the sound of a door creaking open. But this time, it came from downstairs, from that locked door near the kitchen. I got up, tiptoed to the top of the stairs, and listened. There it was, faint footsteps, moving below the house. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. I quietly went back to my room and locked the door. I sat there in the dark, holding my phone, ready to call 911. Hours passed before I heard the door shut again and silence filled the house. The next morning, I left. I told Jay that something had come up and I had to cut my stay short. He did not argue. He just stood there at the doorway, watching me with that same cold smile as I carried my bags to the car. I never looked back at that house again. And to this day, I do not know what was behind that locked basement door.